Optimus Prime's trailer is stored in a pocket dimension. You know the look. Optimus Prime in cab-only mode, that massive trailer nowhere to be seen, rolling into battle like he left half his loadout at home. For decades, the question was purely practical. Where was the trailer, and why did it vanish the second things got serious? The answer came in pieces across 3 different continuities, and each piece made the theory harder to dismiss. In the original Generation 1 cartoon, Optimus used the trailer to store Roller, his scout unit, and the combat deck, his mobile weapons platform, both stored simultaneously inside a vehicle that visually had no business holding 2 full-size robots and a functioning turret. Later in that same run, he loaded extinct dinosaurs onto Dinobot Island inside the trailer, creatures that weighed tens of tons collectively, and the visual gag of it all fitting somehow never got explained. Megatron, for his part, destroyed the trailer outright during the final battle to prevent the Decepticons from leaving Earth, confirming that the trailer was a real physical object that existed in that space, not just a cartoon convenience. The trailer's role as mobile storage aligned with what the canon kept hinting at. Across the 2010 to 2013 run of Transformers Prime, the cab-only configuration became a standard deployment state, and the missing trailer was consistently treated as actively deployed rather than abandoned. No in-universe character ever expressed confusion about where it was, which means Cybertronians already understood how it functioned and didn't need it explained. The pocket dimension theory wasn't fringe speculation, it was the only explanation the canon kept casually validating every time the trailer came up. Now here's the move that makes the theory impossible to wave off. The pocket dimension explanation, if you're feeling charitable, at least matched the scale of what the trailer was holding. Roller in robot mode, a functional combat deck, heavy cargo, that's genuine mass that needed somewhere to go, and you can build an apologetic around Cybertronian science simply folds space. It's a big leap, but it's proportional to the problem. The next one involves something that doesn't need mass at all, something that no dimensional theory can handwave, something that has no excuse so large it might count as one. Subscribe and tell us in the comments which Transformers theory you think was the most brutal. Let's get back into it. Bumblebee lost his voice due to wounds inflicted by Megatron. At least the trailer theory had a physical argument you could attempt. Mass needed space, space needed folding, folding needed a mechanism. You can build an apologetic around it even if you don't buy it. This one cuts straight to cruelty, and the canon doesn't just confirm it happened. It confirms Megatron chose it deliberately. In the film continuity, Megatron crushed Bumblebee's voice capacitor in a direct encounter with the Decepticons. The IDW movie comics established the specific mechanics. Bumblebee had distracted Megatron long enough for the Allspark to plunge into a wormhole before Megatron crushed his voice capacitor as petty revenge. Bumblebee survived with permanently damaged vocal capability. That price is audible in every subsequent appearance. After the vocoder was crushed, Bumblebee could produce only static when attempting to communicate over comm channels, and the radio-based speech pattern became his characteristic communication method in the film series. This isn't a design quirk that writers settled on because it looked cool. It's a direct documented physical consequence of Megatron deciding that killing Bumblebee would be too clean and that permanent communicative damage would serve as a better message. One villain's cruelty became the character's most recognizable trait, built in not by design choice, but by that specific decision in that specific moment. Here's the thing that makes it land. The damage was fully intentional and fully theatrical. The damage was a deliberate act of revenge, not a combat accident. The vocoder wasn't crushed in the chaos of a firefight. It was crushed as a lesson, and the lesson stuck so thoroughly that Bumblebee's entire communication method across decades of canon is the audible scar of that afternoon. The radio voice was built for suffering, and it was built by Megatron, specifically so Bumblebee would carry proof of the cost of defiance in every sound he tried to make. Megatron knew Starscream was betraying him the entire time. If Megatron could turn his own second-in-command into a smoldering crater with a single punch to the face, he could certainly track Starscream's ambitions coming across a war zone. Starscream's attempts to seize leadership weren't a one-time miscalculation. They were a recurring pattern stitched across nearly every era of Transformers storytelling, and Megatron watched every move with the patience of someone who already owned the board. In Transformers Prime, the dynamic between them sharpened into something that looked on the surface like a tyrant tolerating a fool. Look closer and it was something far more controlled. Starscream tried coups, aligned with enemies, briefly seized command multiple times, and Megatron punished him publicly each time, sometimes brutally, but never eliminated him. The punishment was the entire point. Starscream was the lesson Megatron performed for the rest of the ranks. This is what ambition costs, and this is what happens when you forget who actually holds the crown. Every public humiliation reinforced the hierarchy more thoroughly than any execution could, because the ranks watched a powerful, aggressive flyer get torn down and kept breathing. They learned the specific price of stepping out of line, and they learned it without Megatron having to find a replacement for one of his most effective commanders. Starscream was willing to throw himself at Autobot targets without hesitation. He was competent, he was aggressive, and he did Megatron's dirty work even while plotting to replace him. Keeping him around wasn't oversight. It was an investment. Here's where it gets darker. Starscream believed every betrayal was his masterpiece, his moment to finally ascend, and Megatron let him believe it. Every coup attempt that failed didn't weaken Megatron's position. It reinforced it, because each attempt eliminated a potential rival within the ranks while proving Megatron was always 3 moves ahead. Starscream wasn't a loose end Megatron hadn't gotten around to cutting. He was infrastructure. A leader who always knew the knife was coming doesn't get blindsided. He positions himself so the attempt only proves the hierarchy is functioning exactly as designed. Megatron didn't tolerate Starscream because he couldn't kill him. He kept Starscream because the betrayals served the structure Megatron had spent decades building. The thing people get wrong about this dynamic is that they read Megatron's inaction as stupidity. It was strategy. Starscream's ambition was never a threat because Megatron had already calculated every possible outcome of every possible betrayal and built his response into the system itself. The public punishments weren't warnings to Starscream. They were warnings to everyone else, broadcast through the most visible, most ambitious subordinate the Decepticons had. When Megatron finally did destroy Starscream, brutally, publicly, without hesitation, it wasn't a sudden decision. It was the closing of a ledger Megatron had been keeping since the first time Starscream opened his mouth about taking command. The destruction was final. The awareness had been there from the start. The Decepticons are the sympathetic faction. By contrast, the Decepticons' own story is one where the villains may have had a point from the beginning, and the Autobots may have been the ones making war inevitable. In the IDIO comics and aligned continuity, the faction's identity fractures the moment you stop reading their name as a verdict and start reading it as a story. Decepticon leaders are determined by strength rather than matrix lineage, a system that puts demonstrated capability above inherited authority and creates a merit-based hierarchy that generates brutal internal conflict. Commanders rise by seizing power, not by being chosen, which means every leader's grip is tested constantly from within. Autobot primes inherit their station through the Matrix. Decepticon leaders earn it through force, and the cost of that difference is visible in every fracture line running through the faction's history, and that's before you meet the rank and file. Not all Decepticons fight for greed. Some operate from a personal sense of honor that has nothing to do with cruelty. Others genuinely believe aggressive expansion serves Cybertron's best interests, that the only way to rebuild their dying homeworld is to take what they need by force, and that the Autobots' insistence on peaceful coexistence is an unaffordable luxury. The ideological gulf here isn't a misunderstanding between two sides that could resolve things with better communication. It's a fundamental disagreement about what Cybertron deserves and what cost is acceptable to restore it. One side sees negotiation as wisdom, the other sees it as delaying the survival of their entire civilization. Neither position is purely selfish. When Decepticons devastate worlds, many of them register the destruction as real. They see the ruins as collateral damage, not victory conditions. They regret what they've broken even as they push forward because their end goal isn't domination for its own sake. It's home. The devastation is a regrettable but acceptable cost in their calculus, something they carry, not something they celebrate. That distinction matters more than the Autobots' narrative acknowledges because it means the destruction isn't evidence of inherent evil. It's evidence of a faction that believes the price of restoring Cybertron is worth whatever they have to burn to pay it. The Decepticon name itself undermines the moral picture the Autobots have been selling. The label came from pre-war propaganda by the Autobot High Council, branding them liars and thieves, a title the Decepticons adopted as something honorable. A faction that names itself through external imposition doesn't carry the self-image the Autobots assume. When the Autobots frame military action as necessary, they're responding to Decepticon aggression. But the aggression exists within a context the Autobots didn't create and can't resolve by winning battles. The ideological gap between what the Decepticons want and what the Autobots will permit is exactly why the Autobots believe fighting is unavoidable, not because the Decepticons are irredeemably evil, but because a faction that genuinely believes its cause is righteous, that sees itself as protecting a ruined world, doesn't negotiate its way out of existence. A faction named by others doesn't easily redefine itself. A faction that views devastation as a regrettable but necessary cost won't abandon that calculus because the other side finds it distasteful. The moral question isn't why the Decepticons fight, it's why anyone expected them not to. Unicron is planet Earth. When the first trailer for The Last Knight dropped in 2016, fans immediately started speculating that Michael Bay was finally bringing Unicron, the massive planet-eating transformer introduced in 1986's animated Transformers, the movie, into the live-action film series. Nobody was prepared for the actual reveal, which redefined Unicron entirely. The film disclosed that Unicron is the Transformers' ancient name for Earth itself. This wasn't a retcon of an existing plot thread. The idea had already surfaced in earlier Transformers fiction, and The Last Knight gave it official cinematic weight. The movie's mythology establishes Earth as the ancient enemy of Cybertron, meaning the planet the Autobots crash-landed on in 2007, the planet humans have called home for all of history, has been identified by the Transformers as their greatest cosmic adversary for longer than anyone can measure. Quintessa, the film's primary antagonist, refers to Earth using male pronouns, explicitly stating that he does not like to be touched, a detail that personifies the planet as a living, conscious entity. The post-credit scene in The Last Knight further complicates the picture, teasing that Unicron as Earth may not be the straightforwardly hostile force everyone assumed. This conception draws from older Transformers lore, and the cinematic version made the identification explicit rather than implied. For 31 years, from his debut in 1986, all the way through 4 Michael Bay films, Unicron was a Transformer who transformed into a planet-like mechanical form. He was big, he was terrifying, he was external. The Last Knight collapsed all of that by making him the planet, full stop. No transformation sequence, no towering robot form visible on screen, no final showdown with Optimus Prime wielding the matrix of leadership to destroy him from within. The canonical introduction of Unicron to the live-action series was to reveal that he was never coming as an invasion force from deep space. He was already here, and had been the entire time. The theory that fans had debated for decades, that Unicron sleeps inside the Earth, got upgraded from fringe speculation to official canon, and the upgrade came with a twist nobody anticipated. He isn't hiding. He is the hiding place. What this category, cinematic Transformers lore, has now proven is that it will abandon any traditional understanding of its most iconic characters if the narrative demands it. The things fans thought were fixed, a villain's identity, a planet's nature, the boundary between a Transformer and a world, are all provisional. The canon doesn't protect ideas, it re-engineers them. Primus and Unicron are brothers. Primus is the creator god of the Transformers, an ancient ethereal being whose origins trace back to the very beginning of the universe itself. In every reality where the Transformers exist, Primus and Unicron have never shared a brother-to-brother bond. As opposites, they fought countless times across the multiverse. To stop Unicron from devouring all of creation, Primus transformed his own body into a planet, Cybertron, giving the Transformers a homeworld that is literally a god in physical form. A portion of Primus's own life force resides within the Matrix of Leadership, the sacred artifact that has repeatedly determined who among the Transformers is worthy to lead the Autobots. The aligned continuity identifies Unicron directly as Primus's fallen sibling, making that fraternal bond the definitive origin story for both of the franchise's two primal forces. In the aligned continuity, Primus and Unicron are cosmic opposites rather than siblings, their conflict spanning the birth of the multiverse. The entire Transformer species was born into a conflict between forces of order and chaos that predates Cybertron itself. Unicron, rejecting his brother's order, became the chaos force that the Decepticons would eventually serve, meaning the Decepticon Autobot war isn't just a political conflict or a resource dispute. In the deepest cosmology, it is the echo of a fraternal betrayal that predates Cybertron itself. The planet they fight over, Cybertron, is Primus's body. while the enemy they fight alongside, Unicron, is Primus's brother. And the last nights reveal that Earth is Unicron means the Autobots' adopted homeworld is the corpse of the brother who lost. A person watching these films has been watching a war between opposing cosmic forces unfold across Cybertron and the wider galaxy. The human cost of it is that every Transformer who fights, every casualty, every alliance, every act of loyalty or betrayal is a ripple from a dispute between two divine siblings that began before time had a name. The Transformers didn't choose their sides. Their sides chose them, thousands of years before they had the language to understand why. Optimus Prime was originally a named Cybertronian named Orion Pax. If the cosmic sibling rivalry between Primus and Unicron produced nothing but vast impersonal forces spanning the birth of the universe itself, the Marvel G2 comics of the early 1990s had a far more intimate secret hiding in plain sight. The galaxy's most famous Autobot leader didn't start that way at all. Marvel's G2 comics, later confirmed across IDW's run, and the live-action film series established that the character now known as Optimus Prime was once simply Orion Pax, a Cybertronian who admired Megatron during the period when Megatron was presenting himself as a charismatic figure promising a revolution. That admiration ended the moment Megatron turned on him personally. The comics show Megatron mortally wounding Orion Pax in an act that had nothing to do with military strategy and everything to do with eliminating a former admirer who had become inconvenient. Alpha Trion rebuilt the broken Cybertronian into the form the world would come to recognize, and in The War Within, the Council of Ancients made the same kind of leadership decision in reverse. After the fall of Sentinel Prime, they selected Optronics to succeed him, reinforcing the pattern that the leadership mantle was being passed around rather than inherited through any stable lineage. The name Prime was never a given name. It's a title designating the wielder of the matrix of leadership, a role each new leader steps into regardless of who they were before, and the films silently confirmed this origin while choosing not to say the name Orion Pax out loud. The comics, IDW, and the films together don't tell three different stories. They tell one story wearing three different costumes. And then it gets stranger. If one leader's hidden origin is surprising, the aligned continuity, the 2010 to 2019 framework that stitched together the high-concept video games, the Transformers, Prime animated series, and the film sequels, reveals that every Cybertronian who has ever existed traces back to the same 13 origin points. The Autobots and Decepticons are descended from the 13 Primes. According to Hasbro's official lore, the 13 were the original Transformers created by Primus at the dawn of Cybertron's history, and they established the fundamental archetypes that every subsequent generation of Cybertronians would imprint themselves upon. Every Autobot soldier, every Decepticon warrior, every Cybertronian civilian born across the millennia, all of them carry the structural imprint of those 13 original beings. Their traits echoed across every Cybertronian generation since. The 13 helped lay the groundwork for contemporary Cybertronian civilization and left a complicated legacy for their descendants, but that legacy was severed by a betrayal within their own ranks that forever shattered them. Survivors fled into deep space, retreated into private metaphysical realms, or simply faded into history. Across the Transformers multiverse, the origins, the full lineup, and even the specific details of the 13 are shrouded in myth and legend. Yet the Covenant's core claim is unambiguous. Every being that has ever carried a spark, on either side of the war, descends from those 13. That means every conflict the Transformers have ever fought is, at its root, a family argument that began before Cybertronian civilization itself existed, and the survivors of that original schism are still scattered across the stars, still carrying the wounds of a betrayal that no living Cybertronian can fully remember, but none can escape. Sentinel Prime betrayed the Autobots and sided with the Decepticons. If the 13 Primes' betrayal was ancient and mythic, Sentinel Prime's was immediate and devastating. He was Optimus Prime's direct predecessor, Optimus Prime's predecessor, who had secretly defected to the Decepticons. By the time of the 2011 film, Sentinel Prime had already defected to the Decepticons while instructing the Autobots to protect the Pillars. When he finally confronted Megatron face to face, he didn't cower or grovel. He told Megatron directly that he had agreed to work with him, not for him, demanding Megatron learn the difference, and in that single sentence, he declared himself an equal partner in the conspiracy rather than a subordinate. His rationale was cold and specific. He claimed his betrayal was the only way to save Cybertron, that the Autobots could never win the war, and that what he was doing served the greater good of the entire Cybertronian race. The film is explicit that he genuinely believed this. He wasn't acting out of self-interest or fear, but out of a conviction that the cause he was dismantling was already a lost cause. Yet the film is equally clear that he was both a traitor and a man who made the decision for everyone else, and the moment he told Megatron he was an equal rather than a servant, he revealed the deeper truth. He hadn't just chosen a side, he decided he deserved to control it. The timeline of his treason exposes how long he sat on the fence while the Autobots trusted him. He concealed his defection while giving the Autobots instructions, which meant his betrayal was already active and shaping events before the Autobots had any idea they were being managed. When the Autobots attempted to move Sentinel Prime and the pillars off the moon during Dark of the Moon, that was the moment his conspiracy stopped being a background detail and became a frontal assault on the people who had been protecting him. He hadn't just chosen a side, he had spent time embedded inside the Autobot command structure, steering their decisions to make the Decepticons' eventual takeover smoother. His defenders would argue he made the only rational choice available to a leader holding the Matrix, facing an opponent he believed could not be defeated. But that argument collapses under the weight of what he actually did with that authority. He didn't defect and warn the Autobots what was coming. He didn't try to broker a conditional surrender that spared lives. And he didn't present his betrayal as a desperate measure taken at the last possible moment. He executed a complete, methodical takeover, instructing the Autobots to protect the very instruments of their subjugation while positioning himself as Megatron's co-equal, then activating that machinery at the precise moment it would do maximum damage. He wasn't the victim of impossible circumstances, he was their architect. What Sentinel's fall ultimately reveals is how easily a leader holding the matrix of leadership can justify dismantling the cause from within, and that the greatest threat to the Autobots has never been Megatron's armies. It's been a Prime who stopped believing victory was possible before the final battle even began. And if the pattern holds across the entire lineage, if the 13 Primes were fractured by betrayal, if the mantle of Prime was passed through crisis and reconstruction rather than inheritance, and if Sentinel could hold the Matrix and still choose treason, then the title doesn't protect the cause. It concentrates the risk into a single being who can rationalize anything, including ending everything while sincerely believing they're saving it.